Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and today I am following up on some work I was doing on a plugin called Recurve. As follows. Look, see? This is the new plugin, and we're still kind of putting out very simple testbed plugins as I continue to develop things. But you might find this one amusing. This is just curve, lowercase, because it doesn't have the boostiness and it doesn't have the safety clipper, and it's just the purest version of what Recurve does that I've been able to make so far. Again, the compression algorithm is one line of code and one variable. Acts kind of like this. This copy of span is on the output of the track, but before it hits a bit shift gain, which is there to sort of tone things down, is one bit down so that it balances with me talking about it a little better. And I'll turn on curve now. Turn it off. And you may say, what is this doing? Doesn't seem to be doing very much. And that is in part because it's a very clean sort of algorithm. The way that it engages, again, like I talked about in the Recurve video, is it's like following a sine wave all the way around until it wraps around on itself again, which is why the initial plugin was called Recurve. And I think that I would be calling the algorithm the Recurve algorithm because it goes through the intensity of a sine, and with silence it's not writing the gain up at all. It goes through a phase where it's writing the gain up, slowly tapers off and turns into dialing the gain back down again and pegs at that -1 point. But I can just show you, can't I? Here. We'll throw on a different thing. See where it's peaking out? And now I can do this. Much the same until I turn curve off, and it's much louder. Actually, it would help if I turn purest gain on. Let's try that. These things always happen to me. They probably happen to you, be honest. DAWs, man. So let's go through that again. Curve was on. You were hearing curve. But now we're slamming it. And if we turn it off, we get lots of really loud distortion. And that is roughly the amount of slam you get out of Recurve, which is a sort of boosty, spectacular, check this algorithm out kind of thing. Whereas Curve, if you have it at 0, you will find that it isn't super obvious. Like I can have it turned off, then turn it on. Doesn't sound wildly different. It's certainly not hurting the sound. And then if we turn on something that we can boost into it, we can start to experience what happens. So what's happening here is we've got things turned up loud enough that Curve is going to try to catch on to sounds that are supposed to be loud and make them louder. And it's also turned up more than loud enough, we got 12 dB of gain on the sucker, that it will catch sounds that should be clipping and turn them down. Indeed, turn them down quite fast, because Curve and Recurve react quite quickly. That said, you can see on the little gain meter here that, and it's kicking in with my voice, but when you turn it on, we're going to get the music coming through it. And we can see that now my voice isn't affecting it at all, but we've got peaks up to about -1.9. Without Curve on there, they'll go a little higher. But then as we turn on the massive super boost, we're going to start seeing peaks here that are going above 0. And that's because Curve is very simple and it does not have those peak clips like Recurve had. And the reason you're not hearing that on the output mix is we're using a bit shift gain trim to take the output down 6 dB. So this 2.6 is not actually clipping in the output at all. If I push it until it's more than 6 of an over, then we'll get clipping on the final output. And this is what Curve sounds like when being absolutely smashed. And you'll notice that's very different from your typical compressor, because your typical compressor is going to take the quiet stuff in the background, the room sound, and drag it right up. Whereas Curve doesn't want to do that. In fact, if we pull it down to a small amount of boost, that's actually very similar to what the raw sound is. Except for this raw sound is peaking around 0. And if we put Curve on there, it's going to be catching some of that stuff and pulling it down. And then, of course, we can smash it a little harder. And this might work for some of you. This might be a useful enough little tool in its way, even in this being developed state. And of course we can put regular music into it as well. $11 dB again, anyone? Let's dial that back down again. And with this we can hear the kinds of stuff it does with dynamics and with that background reverb. Because this particular track has a lot of background reverb in there. And you can get it to kind of bloom outwards. Here, let's nuke this in. And if you're not pushing it super hard, like we're giving it 3.4 dB of extra gain, if Curve wasn't there, we'd be getting this. But you turn Curve on, and it's capable of still clipping, but it's doing its compression thing, very politely. So think of Curve as like your extremely hyper-transparent compressor that'll catch some of your overs, but it's not designed to be the ultimate loudenator. Like, let me throw a couple of things at it here. Here's another track, and we'll start with 0 dB just to see what we get out of it. And it's a weird track. And we'll turn curve on. And without boosting into it, things are just sort of evened out just a little bit. Turn it off, and we have the full dynamics. Turn it on, and there's just the slightest mellowing of everything. Stuff is inconspicuously being chilled out. And the neat thing about it is if you have a dynamic track that has a lot of space in there, Curve is going to respect that and maintain the space real diligently. Like, actually, very few of the things I've got in here have that kind of empty spaces between beats because I'm so a fan of reverb and stuff. But this is a good example of one of the things we can do. And the way this is set up, the levels are just the way that it softens the resonant peaks and things that get a little bit loud is real subtle. Like, I'll turn it back off again. And then we'll turn it back on. And as you can see, purest gain is not a factor in this. Now, we could push into it a little bit harder like this. And that sounds good. And we're still not clipping. It's still catching stuff. It's not guaranteed to catch the overs. It's pretty huge sounding, honestly. We can give it about 2, even 3 dB. And we're getting kind of close to a clip. Especially with these bright little sounds that are very abrupt and very sudden. That stuff could potentially clip. And here we are pushing, we're pushing this very dense mix with all this reverb and all this extremely deep bass, and just giving it 3 dB over the sort of safety factor where it was captured, and things are behaving themselves real well. Curve is the way it is for a reason, really. Like, this is even a better example than recurve, which was more or less just a quick shot, put something out in exactly its most natural form, and there will eventually be more parameters and adjustments and things like that. But in a lot of ways, like, curve is lowercase for a reason, too. This is the essential Airwindows style, faceless, controlless, just stick it somewhere. It is a stereo plugin, so it wants to be on the 2-bus. You can probably come up with ways of running it on a mono track, even if you just split it into mono or whatever, and both it and recurve handle stereo in a rather clever way, in that the algorithm is so strikingly geared towards reining in louder stuff and then searching for that area where quieter stuff comes in, that both channels are applied to the gain trim at all times. Now, there's other compressor plugins I've done in the past that use clever tricks like a sort of bridge rectifier type arrangement where the loudest of either track automatically contributes to the compression most. Curve totally doesn't have to do that because it's chasing the stereo mix, and it is linked stereo. This is not a dual mono kind of arrangement. It's not about having the stereo image wander in any way. But the way that it works is it's able to use both of the tracks directly. It doesn't make a comparison there either. Like, it doesn't make a comparison of are you above or below a certain threshold, because it's the one recurving function that does all of that. And then we've got the same recurving function on both of the channels running simultaneously. And, well, it does this sort of thing. That's a bit loud. But essentially it works like this. We could just throw it at stuff. That's good. Some electric piano, I think. It's a real electric piano too. That's this rose over here. So let's bring it back to where it's obviously contributing. And so here we have curve taking this, adding maybe just a little bit of gain, just a touch. Doesn't have to. I can take it down to 1 dB again. And it is respecting the dynamics of the track and still compressing it. It is still sort of bringing up stuff in the background, but if this track suddenly broke and was like sudden dead silence except for some reverb tails in the background and stuff, you would be presented with that dynamic variation, and it would accentuate the reverb tails just a touch. I've heard that happen real dramatically occasionally in some tracks that I tested it out with, but this is not the kind of compressor that goes whoosh, 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 pump, pump. This is a completely different beast. And the reason it's lowercase is because this is about the simplest form of this kind of thing you can have. And the least amount of threshold between compressing and release that you can. It doesn't need to even use... Because of a similar phenomenon like what I put into Spiral, it doesn't need to use separate attack and release either. It's all the same factor, and all that's happening is, much like Spiral, the stuff that is bringing the gain back up again, as it gets closer to 0, as it gets closer to silence, it gets slower. So it has its own special way of locking on to sounds. And, well, I guess for showing you a final glimpse of all this, let's just fire up that drum kit again. So a natural curve sounds very similar to completely plain, unmoderated anything. It doesn't bring up background noises or anything like that. But then as you start hitting it, we can shape it in all these different ways. Like this is just slightly pushed, or the curved version of smashing it. You'll notice big dynamic variations in this. That might be useful to people. Or hyper smash it. Or pull it right back. And again, we can hear that cymbal just kind of riding there. It sits where we leave it. It's not going up and down all the time. And we can dial in whatever amount of solidity into these sounds that we want. This might be useful for, like, I don't know, bass tracks and things as well. And which is not to say that I'm going to be compelled to turn Curve into like a mono thing to put on bass tracks and such. It's more likely that this will become part of future plugins that I use, because this, like the spiral algorithm, is just one of the algorithms that I can use in whatever I want. So if you want some kind of crazy multiband bass thingy and stuff, well, you'd have to twist my arm pretty hard because I don't like multiband things. But having done so, this is a natural part of something like that. And it's fairly easy to put together because I've got it worked out. Again, if you like me doing this kind of work, then by all means, you don't have to necessarily wait. That's fine for me. Fine with me if you don't wait. Behave as if Curve is a $50 plugin that I just released. Jump on my Patreon and add a $50 pledge to whatever it is that you've got, and behave as if it is a commercial product. Do that. I mean, I do pay attention to what stuff lights people up as far as them jumping on the Patreon is concerned, because how can I not? I live in a society too. And, by all means, signal to me in that way. And you can also signal to me by bugging me and demanding that I do certain things and then wait patiently for me to do them. But the neat thing about Curve, in its simplest form, which is what it is, this is just this one little plugin, just like this, and there's no controls, and you just plunk it onto your 2-bus or your drum sub mix or whatever. I mean, you could put it on many things. You could put it on a bunch of stems, and it'll behave itself really super well. And it'll just sort of keep everything in check, unless you start to push into it really hard, in which case it won't necessarily keep everything in check, and it'll start compressing more obviously. But there's a broad range of stuff you can do with it. Think of it as just an expansion of your whole mixing system, is probably the best thing I can tell you about that. And if you don't push it really hard, you're not going to get big, obvious, obnoxious results. And if you're trying to do crazy pumping and sucking noises from compression, you need to use something else. But for something that will just sit stuff where you need it, this could be your best friend. Curve is free to use, and I just encourage the Patreon thing because that's how I survive and keep doing this stuff. But understand that I don't make any demands, especially for people who are poorer than me, because there's a lot of people doing great music who are poorer than me, and I will never forget that. But feel free to use Curve in everything that you would like to use it on, and all your different computers, all your mixes, you even get the source code. I hope you like it, and I'm continuing to work on stuff because I can. So I will talk to you later. I've got some more plugins to bring out. There's some stuff out of Airwindows' past. But I gotta say, I always really like it when I don't have to only rely on the Airwindows past and stuff that I was doing in 2007. And I can whip out stuff that's completely current. Recurve and Curve are an example of some stuff that I'm doing that's completely current, and I think that they're going to be a big help to people. So with that, I'll talk to you later.